Welcome to another edition of the Invisible Wheelchair Interview Podcast. I'm Donald Grodoff, family coach with FamilyOCD.com, FocusedHealthyFamily.com, and of course, InvisibleWheelchair.com. In the Invisible Wheelchair interviews, I get the wonderful chance to interview some of the experts with obsessive-compulsive disorders, professionals that treat OCD, people who are going through or have been through OCD, parents and caregivers of those suffering from OCD, and of course anyone that advocates for treatment of OCD. My goal of these interviews is to inform people on all aspects of OCD and bring about awareness of obsessive-compulsive disorder. Please remember that I am not a doctor, therapist, or counselor, and the content, information, resources, and ideas that are talked about and brought up here in these interviews are not necessarily the views and opinions of myself, Family OCD, Focused Healthy Family, and Invisible Wheelchair Podcast, and I always recommend to seek additional professional help in finding solutions for yourself. You can find out more about me at FamilyOCD.com, FocusedHealthyFamily.com, and InvisibleWheelchair.com. This podcast interview was recorded on November 21st, 2017. Today I have the privilege of introducing you to a fellow EFT practitioner and therapist, Joan Kaylor. Joan is an expert and master trainer in emotional freedom techniques, aka EFT tapping. She is also an international teacher, therapist, and consultant. She has been helping individuals and families since 1994. She says, "My passion is helping vets with post-traumatic stress disorder and stop them from dying of suicide." Joan is an owner and CEO of Joan Kaylor, MSEd, LPC, Counseling and Consulting International. She is sought as a keynote speaker and teacher. She is an instructor on Udemy.com. Joan is an adjunct faculty for the University of Pittsburgh School of Social Work, Department of Continuing Education. Joan is a member of the Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology, ACEP, the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, and the Pennsylvania Counseling Association. Joan is certified in energy psychology, emotional freedom techniques, and cognitive behavioral therapy. I am privileged to have this interview, and let's get to the interview. So, Joan, I am so happy that you've joined me today on the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. I'm so glad to have you here talking to my audience, and I welcome you.
Dawn, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to talk with you and your audience about emotional freedom techniques for OCD.
I'd start out, as I do with most of my visitors, I talk about kind of their story, however you wish to put it out there for my audience. I'd love them to know a little bit more about you.
Sure. I went to Duquesne University here in Pittsburgh, graduated in 1994, served on the board of directors of the International OCD Foundation from 91 until 97, took the first Behavior Therapy Institute that the International OCD Foundation had way back in 96. So I was in the first group to be certified in cognitive behavior therapy. Then, lo and behold, in 96, I also was introduced to emotional freedom techniques because up until that point, I had simply done exposure and response prevention and cognitive behavior therapy for OCD. Then I was introduced to emotional freedom techniques by my then supervisor of all things, who was a psychologist. He was very interested in it. He taught me how to use, actually at that time it was thought field therapy back in the 90s. And then I began researching it, met Gary Craig, studied with him, studied with Tina Craig. Fast forward to 2012. I became certified as a gold standard practitioner of EFT through the Association of Comprehensive Energy Psychology, ACEP. I had been using EFT since 96, since learning about it, but then I wanted to pursue it further, and then got my training and certification through ACEP, worked with Tina Craig, and now I'm an advanced practitioner of the gold standard of EFT.
I'd be curious because I am not a gold standard. I am, you and I are both EFT practitioners. You've been doing it obviously longer than I have. I've been doing it since 2003. But I would love to know what your style is and what the difference is between the gold standard and, I guess I call it regular EFT, if you want to call it that. Maybe you could tell me a little bit about what you see as the difference in your style that you work with.
Okay. The gold standard is a actually registered trademark that Tina Craig has on her brand of EFT. And since she's the daughter of Gary Craig, you can't get any closer
Yeah.
to EFT than Tina. It's very specific. She teaches specific language for EFT. And there are many different approaches. There's the movie technique. There's tell the story technique. There's the tearless trauma technique. There's sneaking up on EFT. There are many different ways to approach a problem with a client using one of those techniques within the gold standard of EFT. So I was specifically trained in each one of those techniques of EFT to be able to determine what the problem is, what do we want to target, and then what the aspects are, and how to do the testing. So it's not just a matter of, oh, I feel better now. It's a matter of different ways to test. Has the charge of the problem been completely eliminated? That's what I learned studying under Tina.
That's wonderful. So, being that we're, this audience that I'm talking to with my podcast is about OCD, how do you see EFT, emotional freedom techniques, fitting in with OCD? And I know it from my side, and I've done work on it, but I would love to hear how you work it in and how you work with it, using it with OCD.
It's a wonderful method that goes along with exposure and response prevention. What I do first, of course, is the assessment to see how OCD is bothering someone. How is it interfering in the quality of their life? And then we make a list of the obsessions, the compulsions, and the avoidances. Then I ask them to rate the compulsions from most bothersome to least bothersome. We choose the least bothersome compulsion. I ask them, what is the fear, the feeling, the sensation, the unknown dread, the picture, the obsession? What is it that triggers this uncomfortable feeling or fear that causes them to do the compulsion, whether it's a mental compulsion or a behavioral compulsion? We focus on that feeling. Then we do EFT on that feeling. So it would be something like tapping the karate chop point below the little finger. Even though I have this fear of the unknown, that somebody is going to break into my house and do something terrible if I don't check my front door 10 times, I deeply and profoundly accept myself. Even though I know this fear is unreasonable, but I can't stop it unless I check the door, I deeply and profoundly accept myself. And then we go through tapping points until the amygdala has calmed down. Then I might introduce the exposure. Now, if they're at home and it warrants it, we'll meet through the computer. Or I will teach them this technique. We will record it on their phone, and I will ask them to do the tapping before they do the exposure. The exposure is to leave the door unlocked for 5 minutes at night and take the risk that someone is going to come into their home and do something bad, or leave the door unlocked for 5 minutes and leave the home. Get in the car and drive around the block knowing that that door is unlocked and someone might come in. But the better exposure is to have them to have them leave the door open, walk away for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 1 hour, and see how they feel. What happens with EFT is that they can't get in touch with the fear. The fear has been eliminated. Then they can walk back to the door, lock it, and walk away without the urge to check. Or they might have a small urge, but it's manageable enough that they do not have to stand by the door and lock, unlock, lock, unlock, lock, unlock. And the same situation goes for any checking behavior, any washing behavior, cleaning behavior, any compulsive behavior that takes away the anxiety. Once the anxiety is removed with tapping, and no, tapping does not become another compulsion, but once that uncomfortable feeling or anxiety is removed through EFT, then it's easy to do the exposure.
Now, my audience is getting more knowledgeable on the ERP, but I from your angle, I'd like you to just kind of explain. You can do it kind of briefly, like what ERP is. I know it's exposure response prevention, and I've done work on it, but again, I'd like your thoughts on it and how you see it and your explanation.
Yes. Well, exposure and response prevention is the gold standard of treatment for OCD, which is exposing someone to the trigger, to the fear of which in OCD, all fears are irrational, even though it feels the same as a real fear. But most people don't want to do exposure and response prevention. If I say, okay, there are all kinds of germs on that doorknob, I want you to go grab that doorknob. They don't want to do it. Or I'll put a cookie on the carpet and say, okay, there are all kinds of germs on this carpet. Now I want you to pick the cookie up and eat it. Or one of my favorites is take off the bottom of your shoe, take your shoe off, put your hand on the bottom of your shoe. Here, I'll demonstrate here for your audience. Here's my shoe. I'm putting my hand on the bottom of my shoe. I learned this one from Jonathan Grayson, one of my teachers. Now I'm going to put these germs. I've been in the parking lot. I've been walking throughout the building. I've got all kinds of icky germs all over me. And now I'm going to grab something to eat without washing my hand. Anyone with OCD is going to freak.
Yeah, I've been down that road.
But if you do the tapping first, it calms the amygdala, which is the part of the brain that sparks. That's the part of the brain that goes into fight, flight, or freeze and says, no, don't do it. It'll kill you. It'll make you sick. You'll spread the germs to someone else. When you calm down the amygdala, then you can, okay, I don't like this, but I'll wait an hour to wash my hands. I'll wait until I get home to wash my hands. I won't use hand sanitizer. I won't wash my hands. And now I'll eat. So I just put germs all over my hand from touching the bottom of my shoe. Now I'm going to take my fingers and put them in my tea to contaminate my tea. Now I'm going to drink my tea with all the germs in it. I just took the risk that I'm going to die or get very sick because I transferred the germs from my shoe into my tea.
Okay.
But with tapping, it makes it easier to do exposure and response prevention. You still have to do ERP because you have to teach your brain that these are false fears and that it doesn't have to do the washing anymore. But adding EFT to it makes it easier.
So that kind of brings up a thought in my mind now. When you talk about, rubbing on the shoe and putting it, eating or whatever, is that more of a final step for somebody, or they've done other steps before that?
Yes, well, that could be leading up to it. That could be a final step. Only with me, I just keep going until they have no fear of contamination anymore. So we might do the
Okay.
shoe thing. We might do the cookie on the carpet thing. We might go into the ladies' or men's room, and this is where everybody goes, ew, put their hands on the underneath of the commode. I mean, you can't get more disgusting than that, right?
Yeah.
Unless you put
Yeah.
your hands on the floor of the restroom.
Yeah.
Can't get more disgusting than that unless you want to hold on to some dog poop or something, which
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't recommend. That's going a little
No,
too far.
that was where I was thinking about. Is that would that possibly be a too big of a step for somebody to go, to immediately hit the shoe? Or so do you, there's
I wouldn't,
some people you have
yeah,
to.
I wouldn't start out with that. I would not
Okay.
necessarily start out with that. However, with EFT, that could be a second exposure.
So as I've seen with other things, that EFT speeds up that process is what I'm hearing you say, I think, anyway.
Yes.
Could you possibly give me just maybe an example, or give my audience an example or two of some cases you might have had?
An adult comes in with a fear of germs. I taught him EFT. I asked him how upset would he get if he touched my doorknob or touched the carpet and took on all those germs. And he said that his subjective units of distress, his SUDS rating, would shoot up to a 7. I said, let's do some tapping on that and see what happens. We did a few rounds of EFT. We brought the SUDS down to a 4, and he was able to touch both the carpet and the doorknob. I think he brought something with him because I make the client bring their own food with them, so I'm not constantly buying stuff. And if they don't, then I send them next door to the drugstore to pick something up so they can't get out of it. But he was able to eat what he brought. He was uncomfortable, but he wasn't paralyzed. And then I asked him, you're not washing until you get home for at least 1 hour. That's how we attacked his fear of germs.
The thing I would also ask, do you have any kind of tips or suggestions for people that are going through of how they can get to this point of wanting to deal with DRP?
First of all, I would let them know that they don't start with flooding. I don't know one clinician that likes flooding their clients, starting at the worst possible place. You
Okay.
use baby steps and you start at the bottom. Just, you want to feel uncomfortable, but you don't want to feel like you're going to throw up and die. We don't do that. I think for people that may have seen things on TV or YouTube and they think, I can't possibly do that. That was TV and YouTube. That's not real life. We don't want to torture our clients that much. We want them to be able to face their OCD fears without also acceptance and commitment therapy, without doing the compulsion, so they can stop doing the compulsion. But we start out slow. So nobody is being tortured in this. We do the hierarchy scale and start out with the least bothersome compulsion and then take small steps. I always say, do you think you cannot do this? Wash or check for 5 minutes. No, Jen, I can't do it for 5 minutes. How about 30 seconds? How about 5? I will count to 5. How about 5 seconds? There's always a starting place. You don't have to start with the biggest fear. You start with the smallest fear. If it's a mental compulsion, then I teach people how to let the horrible thought come in and just be with it, knowing it's a thought and thoughts cannot hurt you. The only thing that hurts you is your belief that the thought is real. And when people understand that that thought isn't real, it's a disgusting thought, it's a horrible thought. Nobody wants to think that they're going to shoot or stab or strangle their loved one or strangle their baby, whatever that horrible thought is. But it's a thought that the OCD has produced. It's not your thought. It's the thought that the OCD has triggered in your mind. And then I teach people how to get mad at the thought, get angry with it, and start yelling at it, and start yelling at their OCD.
Well, thank you for that. Our time is running here, so I want to give you a few minutes here at the end to be able to tell the audience as to how best they could get a hold of you, what give you, and I'll have this also up on the web just to let you know. It'll be both for my audience. I'll let you know that we'll have Joan's information both on the Family OCD and the Invisible Wheelchair podcast, so you can find it there. But I also like you to explain the best way that they can get a hold of you or find out more about you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dawn. They can go to my website, Joan Kaylor, JoanKaylor.com. They can go email me at joankaylor@hotmail.com. What they might be interested in learning, too, is I have a course on Udemy, udemy.com, which is Gentle Behavior Therapy for OCD. I think maybe $10, if that. And they can buy the course and kind of sample what EFT is like for OCD.
And I have taken that course, and I think it is $10. It's a very good way to get your foot in the pond of EFT and ERP, the whole realm of the OCD, ERP, and EFT. So
for those
those letters.
For those that might be interested, I do consulting and coaching throughout the world through my computer. So if you don't live in Western Pennsylvania, we can always do some coaching.
That sounds great. Well, Joan, I thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom about ERP, EFT, and OCD, and for sharing your time today. So thank you for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Dawn. I'm thrilled to meet with you and shed some light on this.
That concludes this interview podcast. Please leave me a comment or question below. That gives me good direction where to go on future podcasts and interviews. I would love to hear your invisible wheelchair stories if you are willing to share it. If you would go to invisiblewheelchair.com and click on Tell Your Story. I want to remind you that OCD, Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, is treatable. I can help you get past OCD. So, if you have heard this interview podcast and other podcasts, and you feel like you need further assistance and would like to spend some time with me working through any issues you have, then feel free to book a session at focusedhealthyfamily.com or familyocd.com, or call me at 704-562-1630. I also offer $85 off of your initial discovery session if you mention that you heard it on this podcast. I hope you enjoyed this interview podcast and will join me for the next one. Remember, keep tapping, talking, and transcending your life to new heights. Thank you, and have a great day.